The moment Al Hendrix saw the white man walking toward his son's grave, 30 years of pain and betrayal crashed over him like a wave. It was September 21, 1970. Greenwood Memorial Park in Seattle was packed with hundreds of mourners who had come to say goodbye to Jimi Hendrix. Musicians, family members, friends, and fans stood in the rain, their grief mixing with the gray Pacific Northwest sky. Al Hendrix, Jimi's father, stood at the graveside with tears streaming down his face. He had raised Jimi alone after his mother died, worked multiple jobs to keep food on the table, supported his son's musical dreams even when there was no money for anything else. And now, at the lowest moment of his life, the man who had abandoned them both when Jimi was just a baby was walking across the cemetery toward them. Everyone expected Al to explode with rage, to demand that this stranger leave, to finally confront the man who had left him to raise a mixed-race child alone in 1940s America. Instead, what Al Hendrix did next would shock everyone who witnessed it and define the true character of the man who raised a legend. He opened his arms and embraced the father who had never been a father at all. This is the story of the most unexpected moment of grace in rock and roll history, and the day that Al Hendrix showed the world what it means to love unconditionally, even in the face of ultimate loss. The story begins in 1942, when James Allen Hendrix was born to Al Hendrix and Lucille Jeter. But what most people didn't know was that Al wasn't Jimi's biological father. Jimi's real biological father was a white man named Johnny Allen Ross, a Canadian soldier who had a brief relationship with Lucille during World War II. When Lucille became pregnant, Johnny Ross disappeared, leaving her alone and unmarried with a mixed-race baby in an era when that carried enormous social stigma. Al Hendrix was a young black man who loved Lucille despite her situation. When they married, he legally adopted baby James and changed his name to James Marshall Hendrix. Al raised Jimi as his own son from the moment he could hold him. Johnny Ross, the biological father, never looked back. He returned to Canada, started a new family, and for 28 years never once contacted the son he had fathered and abandoned. Al Hendrix worked as a laborer, a gardener, anything he could find to support his family. When Lucille died in 1958, Al raised Jimi and his other children as a single father. He bought Jimi his first guitar. He encouraged his musical dreams. He was there for every struggle, every small victory, every moment when Jimi needed a father's guidance. Through it all, Johnny Ross remained absent. When Jimi became famous in the 1960s, when his face was on magazine covers and his music was playing on radio stations around the world, Johnny Ross never reached out, never claimed his son, never acknowledged that the world's greatest guitarist was the baby he had abandoned. Until September 21, 1970. The funeral had drawn hundreds of people to Greenwood Memorial Park. Musicians who had played with Jimi, family members who had loved him, fans who had been touched by his music. The mood was heavy with grief and disbelief. Jimi Hendrix, just 27 years old, was gone. Al Hendrix stood near the grave, supported by family members, barely able to process the loss of his son. He had been Jimi's anchor, his constant source of support, the man who had believed in him when no one else did. As the service was winding down, people began to notice a white man in his 50s standing at the edge of the crowd. He was well-dressed but nervous, clearly uncomfortable. He kept looking toward the grave, then looking away, as if trying to decide whether he belonged there. Jimi's brother Leon was the first to recognize him. "Al, I think that's Johnny Ross." Al looked up and saw the man who had abandoned his family 30 years earlier, the man who had left him to raise a mixed-race child alone in 1940s America. Instead, what Al Hendrix did next would shock everyone who witnessed it and define the true character of the man who raised a legend. He opened his arms and embraced the father who had never been a father at all.
He saw another man who was grieving. Al walked away from the graveside, away from his family and friends, and approached Johnny Ross directly. "You're Johnny," Al said quietly. Johnny Ross nodded, unable to speak. "I know who you are," Al continued. "I know you're his biological father." Johnny looked down at his feet. I saw the news about Jimi. I didn't know if I should come. I didn't know if I had the right." Al studied the man's face. Johnny Ross was crying. Whatever his reasons for staying away, whatever fears or shame had kept him silent for 30 years, he was genuinely grieving the loss of the son he had never known. What Al did next shocked everyone who witnessed it. He reached out and embraced Johnny Ross. "He was your son too," Al said through his tears. "You have every right to grieve for him." The crowd of mourners watched in stunned silence as the man who had raised Jimi Hendrix comforted the man who had abandoned him. "I never forgot him," Johnny whispered. "I thought about him every day. I was young, I was scared. I didn't know how to be a father to a mixed-race child. I was a coward." "We all make mistakes," Al replied. "What matters is that you're here now." Johnny Ross broke down completely. 30 years of guilt, shame, and regret poured out of him as Al held him at his son's graveside. "I followed his career. I bought every album. I was so proud of what he became, but I didn't think I deserved to contact him. I didn't think he'd want to know me." "You might have surprised him," Al said gently. "Jimi had a big heart. He understood people's struggles." The conversation continued for several minutes as the rest of the mourners watched in amazement. Here was Al Hendrix, the man who had every reason to hate Johnny Ross, offering comfort and forgiveness at the worst moment of his life. Leon Hendrix later said it was the most powerful example of grace he had ever witnessed. "My father could have destroyed that man right there," Leon recalled years later. "He could have told him exactly what his abandonment had cost our family. Instead, he showed him love. In his darkest moment, Al chose compassion." As the funeral crowd began to disperse, Al invited Johnny to join the family for the reception. "You're part of Jimi's story," Al said. "You should be there." Johnny Ross spent the rest of that day with the family he had never known. He met Jimi's brothers and sisters. He heard stories about the son he had missed watching grow up. He saw photographs of birthdays, school events, and early musical performances that he had never been there to witness. It was painful for everyone involved, but it was also healing. Johnny told them about his life in Canada, about the family he had raised there, about the guilt that had haunted him for 30 years. He explained that he had wanted to contact Jimi many times, especially after he became famous, but had convinced himself that too much time had passed.
"I was afraid he would hate me," Johnny admitted. "I was afraid I didn't deserve to know him." Al's sister Betty provided perspective that surprised everyone. Jimi used to wonder about his biological father. He never said much about it, but sometimes you could tell he was curious. "I think he would have been glad to meet you." The family shared memories of Jimi's childhood, his musical development, his struggles and triumphs. Johnny listened with tears in his eyes, getting to know the son he had missed raising. As the day ended, Johnny Ross asked Al a question that had been weighing on him. "How can you forgive me? How can you not hate me for what I did to you and Jimi?" Al's answer became legendary among the family members who heard it. "Hate would just add more pain to a day that already has too much," Al said. "Jimi wouldn't want that. He'd want us to find a way to heal." Johnny Ross left Seattle the next day, but he stayed in contact with the Hendrix family for the rest of his life. He sent Christmas cards, birthday wishes, and occasional letters sharing memories of the son he had helped create but never got to know. More importantly, he finally told his Canadian family about Jimi. His other children learned they had a half-brother who had been one of the most famous musicians in the world. The secret that had separated him from Jimi for 30 years was finally broken. Al Hendrix's act of grace at his son's funeral became a defining moment for everyone who witnessed it. It showed that love is bigger than biology, forgiveness is stronger than resentment, and true character reveals itself in our darkest moments. Years later, when asked about that day, Al would simply say, "A father's job is to love his children and teach them how to love others. I couldn't teach Jimi that lesson anymore, but I could still live it." The story spread through the music community as one of the most powerful examples of grace under pressure ever witnessed. Musicians who were there told the story to others, and it became part of the larger legend of the Hendrix family. Johnny Ross died in 1994, 24 years after Jimi's funeral. His obituary in Canada mentioned that he was the biological father of Jimi Hendrix, finally acknowledging publicly the relationship he had hidden for most of his life. Al Hendrix died in 2002, having spent 32 more years carrying the grace he had shown at his son's funeral. He established a foundation in Jimi's name, continued supporting young musicians, and never spoke publicly about Johnny Ross with anything other than compassion. The lesson of that September day at Greenwood Memorial Park wasn't about biology or abandonment or the complexities of mixed-race families in mid-century America. It was about choosing love over anger, grace over revenge, and healing over hate. In the moment when Al Hendrix could have justifiably destroyed the man who had abandoned his family, he chose instead to demonstrate the values that had made him a great father: unconditional love, forgiveness, and the understanding that everyone deserves a chance at redemption. Jimi Hendrix changed the world with his music, but his father changed hearts with his character. If this story of grace triumphing over justified anger moved you, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who's struggling to forgive someone who hurt them. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone chose grace over revenge? Tell us about it in the comments. And don't forget to hit that notification bell for more stories about the moments when love proves stronger than pain.